The howling wind sounded like a chorus of angry spirits as Penelope Dawson stumbled through the blinding white wall of snow. Her horse long since fled in terror when lightning cracked the sky an hour past. She had been foolish to think she could make it from the mining camp back to Malad City before the storm hit, but the message about her father's illness had sent her racing through the Idaho wilderness without proper preparation. Now, in March of 1883, she found herself lost in the mountains with darkness falling fast and the temperature plummeting so low, her breath froze on her scarf. The wind tore at her coat as she pushed forward, trying to remember the landmarks that had guided her on the way up. But everything looked different under the thick blanket of snow that transformed familiar territory into an alien landscape. Her boot caught on something hidden beneath the snow, and she pitched forward, arms windmilling as the ground simply disappeared beneath her feet. The scream that tore from her throat was swallowed by the wind as she fell, her body slamming against rock and ice, tumbling down into darkness. She hit the bottom hard enough to knock the air from her lungs, sprawling in a heap on the frozen floor of what she realized with mounting horror was a deep crevasse in the mountainside. Pain exploded through her left ankle, and she bit back a sob, forcing herself to remain calm even as panic clawed at her chest. Above her, perhaps 20 feet up, she could see the narrow opening she had fallen through, snow swirling across it like a living thing. The walls of the crevasse were smooth ice and stone, impossible to climb even if her ankle had not been screaming in agony. She tried to stand and immediately collapsed again, crying out despite her best efforts to stay quiet. The sound echoed strangely in the confined space, bouncing back at her like a mockery of her predicament. Penelope pulled herself into a sitting position against the wall, her hands shaking as she felt her ankle through her boot. Definitely sprained, possibly broken. Even if she could somehow climb out, she would not make it far in this storm. The cold was already seeping through her layers, and she knew that hypothermia would claim her long before rescue could arrive. Nobody even knew where she was. The miners at the camp thought she had left early enough to beat the weather, and her father back in Malad City would assume she had stayed put until the storm passed. She was utterly alone, trapped in a frozen grave that would be her final resting place. She refused to cry. Penelope Dawson had not survived 22 years in the rough Idaho territory by giving in to despair at the first sign of trouble. Her mother had died when she was 14, leaving her to help her father run his general store while still managing to teach herself bookkeeping and business management well enough that several of the local ranch owners consulted with her on their accounts. She had fought off a drunk cowboy who had tried to corner her in the storage room 2 years ago, breaking his nose with a can of beans before her father came running. She was not going to die in a hole in the ground without at least trying to save herself. But as the minutes dragged into what might have been an hour, the cold working its way deeper into her bones despite her best efforts to stay warm, Penelope felt her resolve beginning to crack. Her fingers were going numb inside her gloves, and her teeth chattered so hard her jaw ached. She tried calling for help a few times, but her voice seemed pathetically small against the roar of the wind above, and she knew the chances of anyone being out in this weather were next to nothing. Any sensible person was holed up somewhere warm, waiting for the storm to pass. The sound reached her ears so faintly at first that she thought she was imagining it. A voice, deep and distant, calling out words she could not quite make out. She held her breath, straining to hear over the wind, and then it came again, closer this time. Someone was out there. Someone was nearby. She gathered all her remaining strength and shouted as loud as she could, her voice cracking with desperation. "Help! I'm down here. Help me. The voice above responded immediately, and she saw a dark shape moving against the lighter gray of the stormy sky. A man's face appeared at the opening, barely visible in the dim light, and she had never been so grateful to see another human being in her entire life. "Hold on down there," he shouted, his voice rough with a cowboy's drawl. "I'm going to get you out." "Please hurry," she called back, hating how weak she sounded. "I'm hurt and so cold." The face disappeared and she heard him moving around above, muttering to himself as he worked. Minutes passed that felt like hours, and she began to fear he had abandoned her or been driven away by the storm. But then a rope came snaking down through the opening and the man appeared again. "Rope secured to my horse," he called down. "I'm coming down to get you. Can you stand?" "I don't think so," she admitted. "My ankle is injured badly." She watched as he lowered himself hand over hand down the rope with the easy confidence of someone who had done such things many times before. When he reached the bottom and turned to face her, she got her first real look at her rescuer. He was tall and broad-shouldered, probably in his mid-20s, with dark hair plastered to his head by melting snow and eyes that were sharp and assessing, even in the dim light. His face was weathered from years of outdoor work, with a strong jaw and a nose that looked like it had been broken at least once. He wore a heavy coat and chaps over wool trousers, and there was a quiet competence in the way he moved that immediately made her feel safer. "Name's Kieran Barrett," he said, kneeling beside her and already examining her ankle with surprisingly gentle hands. "I'm a ranch hand at the Double Creek spread about 5 miles east of here. What in blazes are you doing out in this storm, Penelope Dawson?" she managed through chattering teeth. "I was trying to get back to Malad City from the mining camp. My father is sick and I got a message. The storm came up faster than I expected." Kieran's jaw tightened as he carefully probed her ankle, and she winced despite his gentleness. "Swollen bad, but I don't feel any bones poking where they should not be. Probably a bad sprain. We need to get you somewhere warm fast, though. You're half frozen already." "Can you pull me up on the rope?" she asked, even though she knew it was likely impossible. He shook his head, his expression grim. "Not with that ankle and not in this storm. Even if I could haul you up without hurting you worse, we would never make it through this weather. There's a lined shack about 1/2 mile from here. I was heading there myself when I heard you calling out. We need to get to it before we both freeze to death." "But how?" She gestured helplessly at the walls surrounding them. Kieran stood and walked to the far end of the crevasse, where the walls narrowed but also grew less steep. He examined the rock carefully, testing handholds, then turned back to her with a determined expression. "There's a way up over here, tricky but possible. I'm going to carry you out." "You cannot carry me up a rock wall," Penelope protested, even as relief flooded through her at his certainty. "Watch me," he said simply, and came back to crouch beside her. "This is going to hurt, and I'm sorry for that, but we don't have a choice. Put your arms around my neck." She did as he instructed, and he carefully lifted her, settling her weight so that she was on his back with her arms locked around his shoulders and his hands supporting her legs. The movement jostled her ankle, and she bit down hard on her lip to keep from crying out, tasting blood. Kieran paused, waiting until her breathing steadied. "That's good," he said quietly. "You're doing real good. Just hold on tight and try not to move too much." What followed was the most terrifying experience of Penelope's life, even worse than the fall itself. Kieran began climbing the narrow end of the crevasse with her clinging to his back, his movements slow and deliberate as he tested each handhold before trusting his weight to it. She could feel the strain in his muscles as he pulled them both up, inch by painful inch, and she kept her eyes squeezed shut against the sight of the rocky floor below them. His breathing grew labored but never panicked, and he kept up a steady stream of quiet encouragement that she suspected was as much for himself as for her. "Almost there now. Just a little further. You're doing fine, Miss Dawson. Hold on just a bit longer." When they finally reached the top, and he pulled them both over the edge onto solid ground, Penelope felt tears freezing on her cheeks. Kieran gave them both only a moment to catch their breath before he was moving again, adjusting her on his back and trudging through the deep snow toward where a large bay horse stood waiting, head down against the wind. He settled her onto the horse's back and swung up behind her, wrapping one arm around her waist to hold her steady while the other hand took up the reins. "Lean back against me," he ordered, and she did not have the strength to argue, letting herself sag against his solid warmth. He urged the horse forward, and they began moving through the storm, the animal's steady gait eating up the distance while snow continued to fall in thick, blinding sheets. The ride seemed to last forever, and no time at all. Penelope drifted in and out of awareness, the cold making her thoughts fuzzy and strange. At some point she realized Kieran was talking to her, his voice close to her ear, and she forced herself to focus on his words. "Stay awake, Penelope. Talk to me. Tell me about your father." "What's wrong with him? Pneumonia," she mumbled. "The doctor sent word 3 days ago, said I should come if I could. I have been at the camp keeping books for the miners for the past month. Good money. Father needed it for medicine. Your mother, dead 8 years now, fever took her." She tried to turn her head to look at him, but everything seemed to be moving too slowly. "Why are you out in this?" Checking the northern fence line. "Storm came up while I was out, and I knew I would never make it back to the main ranch. Lucky I was close to the shack." His arm tightened around her. "Even luckier I heard you. Few more hours in that crevasse and you would have been past saving." "Thank you," she whispered. "You saved my life." "Not yet, I have not," he said grimly. "Not until we get you warm and that ankle tended to. Stay with me now, we're almost there." The line shack appeared out of the swirling snow like a miracle, a small dark shape that promised shelter and warmth. Kieran dismounted and lifted her down, carrying her in his arms now as he kicked the door open and brought her inside. The interior was pitch dark and bitterly cold, but at least the wind was blocked. He set her down carefully on what felt like a narrow bunk against the wall. "Do not move," he instructed unnecessarily, since she could not have walked if her life depended on it. "I need to get the horse settled, and then I will get a fire going." She listened to him moving around in the darkness, heard the horse being led inside, which surprised her until she realized the shack must be larger than she had thought, with space for animals as well as people. Such arrangements were common in the remote line shacks where cowboys stayed when working far from the main ranch. The sound of his movements was oddly comforting, solid evidence that she was not alone, that someone capable was taking care of things. The scrape of a match was bright in the darkness, and then golden light bloomed as Kieran lit a lantern hanging from a hook on the wall. The shack was indeed small but well-maintained, with a pot-bellied stove in one corner, a rough table with 2 chairs, shelves holding supplies, and the bunk she was lying on. The horse stood in a small area sectioned off by a rail, already munching on hay from a manger. Kieran moved with efficient speed, getting a fire started in the stove, setting a pot of snow to melt for water, pulling blankets from a chest. Only when the fire was crackling and beginning to throw real heat did he turn his full attention to her. He brought the lantern close, and his expression tightened when he got a good look at her in the light. "You're in bad shape. We need to get you out of these wet clothes before you freeze to death." Penelope felt her face heat despite the cold. "I can manage myself." "The hell you can," he said bluntly, already kneeling to work at the laces of her boots. Your hands are shaking so bad you could not unbutton a coat if you tried, and we don't have time for modesty. I have seen a woman in her underclothes before, and it did not kill me. I promised to be a gentleman about it. She wanted to argue but knew he was right. Her fingers felt like frozen sticks, and she could barely make them bend. She sat still and let him carefully remove her boots, wincing when he had to work the left one off her swollen ankle. His touch was surprisingly gentle for such a large man, and he kept his eyes focused strictly on his work as he helped her out of her coat, dress, and the layers beneath, until she was down to her chemise and drawers. He wrapped her immediately in dry blankets, tucking them around her with the same careful efficiency he brought to everything else. "Your turn," she said, her voice still shaky but growing stronger in the warmth of the shack. "You are soaked through as well." Kieran glanced down at himself as if only just noticing his own condition, then nodded. He stripped off his wet outer layers with no self-consciousness, hanging them near the stove to dry, and Penelope found herself watching the play of muscles under his undershirt as he moved. He was lean and strong in the way of men who worked hard for their living, with none of the softness that came from easy city life. There was a scar on his left forearm, pale against his tanned skin, and she found herself wondering what story lay behind it. He caught her looking and raised an eyebrow but said nothing, just wrapped himself in another blanket and came to sit on the edge of the bunk. "Let me look at that ankle properly now." She extended her leg from beneath the blankets, and he examined the injury carefully in the lamplight. His hands were warm now, calloused but gentle, and she tried not to think about how intimate this all felt, alone with a strange man in a tiny shack in the middle of a storm. Her father would be horrified. Society would be scandalized. But propriety seemed like a foolish concern when one had nearly died in a frozen crevasse. "Definitely sprained, but I don't think it's broken," Kieran said finally. "I am going to wrap it tight. It will hurt." "Everything already hurts," she said with a weak attempt at humor. "What's a little more?" He smiled at that, the expression transforming his face from merely handsome to genuinely attractive. "You have got spirit, Miss Dawson. I will give you that." He bound her ankle with strips of cloth from the supply shelf, working with the competence of someone who had tended many injuries in remote locations. She gripped the edge of the bunk and breathed through the pain, refusing to cry out. When he finished, he sat back and studied her face with an expression she could not quite read. "You did good," he said quietly. "Most people would have been screaming or crying or carrying on. You have got courage." "I was terrified," she admitted. "I still am a little. This storm sounds like it is getting worse." As if to punctuate her words, the wind howled around the shack, rattling the shutters and making the whole structure creak. Kieran glanced toward the door, then back at her. "Storm will blow itself out by morning most likely. We will be safe enough here. This shack has weathered worse than this." He stood and went to the supplies, pulling down cans and packets, and began preparing food. The smell of coffee and beans cooking made Penelope's stomach growl loudly enough that Kieran chuckled. She realized she had not eaten since early morning, too worried about her father and the approaching storm to think about food. "When did you last eat?" he asked, confirming her thoughts. "This morning. Bread and jam before I left the camp." He shook his head. "No wonder you look half-starved. You need food to keep your strength up, especially in this cold." They ate in companionable silence, Penelope surprised by how hungry she was and how good the simple food tasted. Kieran had propped her up with extra blankets so she could sit comfortably, and he sat in one of the chairs by the table, close enough to hand her things but maintaining a respectful distance. The fire crackled pleasantly in the stove, filling the small space with warmth, and slowly Penelope felt life returning to her frozen limbs. "How long have you worked at the Double Creek?" she asked, wanting to fill the silence with something other than the howling wind. 3 years now, Kieran said, cradling his coffee cup in both hands. "Came up from Wyoming looking for work, and the owner, Sam Mitchell, took me on. It is good work, good people. I have been saving my wages, hoping to buy my own place someday. Just a small spread, nothing fancy, but enough to run some cattle and maybe grow some crops." "That is a fine dream," Penelope said sincerely. "My father had similar ambitions when we first came to Idaho. He wanted to ranch, but he had neither the experience nor the capital. The store was supposed to be temporary, just until we got on our feet, but then my mother died and everything got harder." "I am sorry about your mother," Kieran said quietly. "That must have been hard on you, losing her so young." "It was," Penelope acknowledged. "But it also taught me to be strong, to handle things myself. My father is a good man, but he has never quite recovered from losing her. He tries his best, but I have had to grow up fast." They talked through the evening as the storm raged outside, the conversation flowing with surprising ease considering they were strangers. Kieran told her about growing up on a small farm in Wyoming, the youngest of 5 children, and how he had left home at 18 to seek his fortune. He had worked as a ranch hand, a trail driver, even spent 6 months working as a deputy in a rough mining town before deciding that law enforcement was not for him. He spoke about the land with real passion, about the beauty of the mountains and the satisfaction of hard work, and Penelope found herself drawn to his quiet intensity. In turn, she told him about her bookkeeping work, about how she had taught herself numbers and accounts by studying her father's ledgers, and how she had gradually built up a small business helping local ranchers and businessmen with their finances. It was not considered proper work for a young woman, but necessity had overridden propriety, and she had discovered she had a real talent for it. She described Malad City, the growing town that served as a hub for the surrounding ranches and farms and the characters who populated it. "You should work for yourself," Kieran said thoughtfully. "Open your own office. You have got the skills and the reputation." "Women do not open offices," Penelope said, though the idea sent a thrill through her. "People would talk. They already whisper about me working at all." "People always talk," Kieran said with a dismissive wave. "You should do what makes sense for you, not what makes gossips comfortable." It was such a simple statement, but it struck Penelope deeply. She had spent so much of her life trying to balance propriety with necessity, always worried about reputation and respectability. But here was this cowboy suggesting she simply do what she wanted. There was something liberating about the idea. As the night deepened, Kieran insisted she take the bunk while he made himself a bedroll on the floor near the stove. She protested, saying he had already done so much for her, but he was adamant. "You are injured and you have been through hell today," he said firmly. "I have slept in worse places than a warm floor. Do not argue with me, Miss Dawson. If we are going to be snowed in together, you might as well call me Penelope," she said, settling back into the blankets. "Penelope it is then," he agreed, and she saw that smile again, the one that made her heart do strange things in her chest. "And you can call me Kieran." She watched through heavy-lidded eyes as he banked the fire and settled into his bedroll, the lantern turned down to a dim glow. The warmth and safety and the exhaustion of the day's ordeal all combined to pull her toward sleep, but just before she drifted off, she heard his voice, quiet in the darkness. "Sleep well, Penelope. You are safe now. I promise." And strangely, despite everything, she believed him. Penelope woke to pale sunlight streaming through gaps in the shutters and the smell of coffee brewing. For a moment she was disoriented, unable to place where she was, and then the events of the previous day came flooding back. She pushed herself up on her elbows, wincing at the pain in her ankle, and saw Kieran moving quietly around the small shack, clearly trying not to wake her. "Good morning," she said, her voice rough with sleep. He turned, and she was struck again by how handsome he was in the morning light. He had shaved using the water from the melted snow, and his dark hair was damp and neatly combed back. "Morning. How is the ankle?" "Painful," she admitted, "but better than last night. How bad is it outside?" "Storm broke about 2 hours before dawn," Kieran said, bringing her a cup of coffee. "There is about 3 feet of new snow on the ground, but the sky is clear now. Beautiful day, actually." She accepted the coffee gratefully, wrapping her hands around the warm cup. "Can we travel?" "Not you, not with that ankle," he said gently. "But I can ride out, get help. I am thinking I will head to the main ranch, get a wagon and some men, and we can bring you back to Malad City properly. Your father must be worried sick about you by now." Panic fluttered in Penelope's chest. "My father, he will be beside himself. And the miners at the camp will have no idea what happened to me." "I will send word to both places," Kieran promised. "But Penelope, you need to prepare yourself. It is going to take time. Even with the weather cleared, the snow is deep. It will be slow going. I might not be back until late this afternoon, possibly not until tomorrow morning." The thought of being alone in the shack terrified her more than she wanted to admit. "Could I not come with you? Ride double like we did yesterday?" Kieran shook his head firmly. "Too dangerous. You need to keep that ankle elevated and rested. If you are on horseback for hours, you could do permanent damage. I know it is not ideal leaving you here alone, but it is the safest option." She knew he was right, but that did not make it easier. What if something happens? What if the storm comes back? "It will not," he said with confidence. "I have been reading weather in these mountains for years. This is a clear system now, should stay good for at least a few days. You will have the fire, plenty of food and water, and I will leave my rifle here with you just in case. Have you ever fired a gun?" "My father taught me when I was 16, Penelope said. "I am not an expert, but I can hit what I aim at if I need to." "Good," Kieran said, looking relieved. "I am going to get the horse ready and set you up with everything you need within easy reach. I will be back as fast as I possibly can. I give you my word." He was as good as his word, spending the next hour making sure she had everything she might need positioned close to the bunk. He brought in extra wood for the fire, stacked supplies on the table where she could reach them, filled containers with water, and even moved the chamber pot closer, which made them both blush despite the practical necessity. He checked her ankle again, rewrapping it carefully, and left her with detailed instructions on how to care for it while he was gone. "Keep it elevated as much as possible," he said. "If the swelling gets worse or you start to feel fever, you need to keep it cool. There is snow right outside the door if you need it. Do not put weight on it unless you absolutely have to." "I understand," Penelope said, wishing he did not have to go, wishing she could think of a reason to make him stay. It was foolish, this attachment she felt after less than a day, but something about Kieran Barrett made her feel safe and cared for in a way she had not experienced since her mother died. He seemed to hesitate at the door, his hand on the latch, and then he turned back to her. "Penelope, I want you to know that yesterday, finding you, saving you, it was not just luck or coincidence. I believe things happen for a reason. I believe I was meant to find you." Her heart stuttered in her chest. "I believe that too." Their eyes met across the small space, and something electric passed between them, an understanding that went beyond words. Then Kieran nodded once, pulled his hat low, and stepped out into the brilliant white world beyond the door. Penelope spent the day alternating between dozing, reading from a worn Bible she found on the shelf and thinking about Kieran. It amazed her how much impact one person could have in such a short time. She kept replaying their conversations from the previous night, the way he had listened to her with genuine interest, the way his hands had been so gentle when tending her injury, the way his presence had made her feel protected and valued. She thought about his dream of owning his own ranch and found herself imagining what such a place might look like. A sturdy house with a wide porch, barns for the animals, fields of hay growing green in the summer sun. She imagined herself there too, keeping the books and managing the household, and the image felt right in a way that surprised her. She had never been one of those girls who spent all her time dreaming of marriage and babies, too focused on survival and helping her father to think much about romance. But now, lying in this remote shack with her ankle throbbing, she found herself hoping that Kieran Barrett might see her as more than just a woman he had rescued. The sun was beginning to set, painting the snow outside in shades of pink and gold, when she heard the sound of horses approaching. She grabbed the rifle Kieran had left, her heart pounding, but then she heard his voice calling out and relief flooded through her. "Penelope, it is me, and I have brought help." The door burst open and Kieran entered, followed by two other men carrying a makeshift stretcher. Behind them she could see a wagon waiting outside, loaded with supplies and blankets. "Miss Dawson," one of the men said, removing his hat respectfully. He was older, perhaps 50, with graying hair and kind eyes. "Name's Sam Mitchell. I own the Double Creek Ranch. Kieran here told us what happened to you. That was a brave thing you did, trying to reach your father in that storm." "It was a foolish thing," Penelope corrected, though she smiled. "I am grateful to you for coming to help. Could not leave you stranded out here," Sam said. "Though from what Kieran tells me, you have handled yourself mighty well. Now, we are going to get you into this wagon and take you back to Malad City. We sent a rider ahead to let your father know you are safe." The journey back to town was long and uncomfortable, despite the blankets and cushions they had piled in the wagon bed. Every bump and jostle sent pain shooting through her ankle, but Penelope bore it as stoically as she could. Kieran rode alongside the wagon for most of the trip, occasionally dismounting to check on her, his concern evident in every glance and gesture. They reached Malad City well after dark, the lights of the town a welcome sight after the isolation of the mountains. Her father met them in the street, tears streaming down his weathered face, and she found herself crying too as he climbed into the wagon to embrace her. "Penelope, my girl, I thought I had lost you," he sobbed into her hair. "When you did not arrive and then the storm hit, I thought the worst. I prayed every hour that you would be safe." "I am fine, Father," she assured him, though her voice was thick with emotion. "Thanks to Mr. Barrett here. He saved my life." Her father turned to Kieran, who had dismounted and stood respectfully nearby, and clasped his hand firmly. "I owe you a debt I can never repay, young man. You brought my daughter back to me. If there is anything I can ever do for you, anything at all, you need only ask." "No debt owed, sir," Kieran said quietly. "I only did what anyone would do." "Most people would have ridden right past in that storm," Sam Mitchell interjected. "Kieran risked his own life going down into that crevasse. He is a hero, plain and simple." They carried Penelope into the house, and Dr. Harrison, who had been treating her father's pneumonia, examined her ankle thoroughly. His verdict matched Kieran's assessment: a bad sprain but no break, requiring several weeks of rest and elevation. He bound it properly in a splint and left instructions for its care, along with strict orders that she was to stay off it completely for at least 2 weeks. Through all of this, Kieran waited downstairs, and when the doctor left, Penelope insisted her father invite him up so she could thank him properly. Her father went to fetch him, and she quickly tried to smooth her hair and straighten her nightgown, painfully aware of how she must look. Kieran entered her small bedroom awkwardly, hat in hand, looking deeply uncomfortable with the domestic setting. "I just wanted to make sure the doctor said you would be all right before I headed back to the ranch. He says I will be fine," Penelope assured him. "Kieran, I do not know how to thank you for what you did. You saved my life at great risk to your own." "I would do it again in a heartbeat," he said simply, and the intensity in his eyes made her breath catch. "Penelope, I know this is not the time or place, but I need to say this. These past 2 days with you have meant more to me than I can properly express. I have never met anyone like you. You are brave and smart and kind, and I cannot stop thinking about what it might be like to have someone like you in my life permanently." Her heart was racing so fast she thought it might burst from her chest. "Kieran, I have been thinking the same thing. I know it seems sudden, but I feel like I have known you much longer than 2 days. May I call on you?" he asked, stepping closer to her bedside. "Properly, I mean. Court you the right way, with your father's permission and everything done respectably." "I would like that very much," Penelope whispered, and when he took her hand, she felt the same electric connection she had felt in the line shack, only stronger now. Her father, who had been hovering in the doorway, cleared his throat. "Young man, you have my permission to court my daughter if that is what you are asking. Any man who would do what you did for her has proven his character beyond question." The next weeks passed in a blur of healing and anticipation. Kieran came to town every Sunday, his one day off from the ranch, and spent hours sitting with Penelope in the parlor, talking about everything and nothing. Her father chaperoned faithfully, but he often dozed off in his chair, his pneumonia leaving him weaker than he liked to admit, and those stolen moments of relative privacy became precious to them both. They discovered they had more in common than they had realized. Both had lost their mothers young. Both valued hard work and independence. Both dreamed of something more than what they currently had, though neither was quite sure what that something was. Kieran brought her books from the small lending library at the ranch, and she helped him with the ranch accounts, spotting several errors that saved Sam Mitchell a considerable amount of money. Sam was so impressed he offered to pay her for her work, and suddenly she found herself with a legitimate business opportunity. Word spread quickly in a small town like Malad City. Within a month, 3 other ranchers had approached her about keeping their books, and her father helped her set up a small office in the back room of his store. She worked from a chair with her ankle propped up, and by the time Dr. Harrison declared her fully healed 2 months after the accident, she had more work than she could handle. Kieran was there to see her take her first steps without the splint, steadying her with his strong hands, his face split by a proud grin. "Look at you, walking like nothing ever happened." "It still aches a bit," she admitted, "but it feels good to be mobile again. I was going crazy being stuck in one place." "I have something I want to show you," Kieran said, an unusual nervousness in his voice. "If you are up for a short ride, nothing strenuous, I promise." Curious, she agreed, and he helped her into a buggy he had borrowed from Sam Mitchell. They drove out of town, heading east into the hills, and after about 30 minutes he turned onto a narrow track that led through a stand of cottonwoods. When they emerged on the other side, Penelope gasped. Before them lay a beautiful valley, perhaps 100 acres, with a stream running through it and the mountains rising majestically in the background. The grass was coming in green with the spring thaw, and she could see deer grazing in the distance. "Kieran, this is beautiful," she breathed. "Where are we?" "This is my land," he said quietly, and she heard the pride and wonder in his voice. I bought it last week. Used every penny of my savings, but it is mine. 160 acres with water rights to the stream. Sam is helping me get started, loaning me some breeding stock to get my herd going, and I am going to build a house right there on that rise. He pointed to a spot overlooking the valley, perfect for a home, and Penelope could see it all in her mind's eye. The house, the barn, the life that could be built here. It is perfect, she said sincerely. You are going to do wonderful things with this land. Kieran turned to her, taking both her hands in his. Penelope, I bought this land with you in mind. Every decision I made, I thought about what you would like, what would make a good home for you. I know we have only been courting for 2 months, and maybe I should wait longer to ask this, but I do not want to wait. I love you. I have loved you since I found you in that crevasse and saw the courage and determination in your eyes. Will you marry me? Will you help me build this dream into something real? Tears were streaming down her face, but they were happy tears, joyful tears. Yes, she said, her voice breaking with emotion. Yes, Kieran, I will marry you. I love you too, so much it scares me sometimes. He kissed her then, a kiss full of promise and passion and the beginning of everything they would build together. When they finally pulled apart, both of them were laughing and crying at the same time. They were married in June of 1883, in a simple ceremony at the small church in Malad City. Her father walked her down the aisle, his health much improved with the warmer weather and proper medicine that Penelope's bookkeeping business had helped pay for. Sam Mitchell stood as Kieran's best man, and half the town turned out to celebrate the marriage of the bookkeeper and the cowboy who had saved her life. They moved into a small cabin on the property while Kieran built their house, and Penelope continued her bookkeeping business from home, riding into town twice a week to meet with clients. She also kept the books for their own ranch, tracking every expense and profit as they slowly built up their herd. The work was hard, harder than anything either of them had done before, but they were building something together, and that made every challenge worthwhile. By the spring of 1884, the house was complete, a sturdy 2-story structure with a wide porch and windows that looked out over the valley. They moved in on a bright May morning, carrying their few possessions up the steps together, and that night they christened every room, laughing and loving and reveling in the life they were creating. Their first child, a son they named Thomas, was born in February of 1885 during another snowstorm, though this one found Penelope safe and warm in their bedroom with Dr. Harrison in attendance and Kieran pacing anxiously downstairs. When the doctor finally let him come up to meet his son, Kieran wept openly, holding the tiny bundle as if he were made of glass. "He is perfect," he whispered, looking from the baby to Penelope with such love in his eyes it made her heart ache. "You are perfect. How did I get so lucky?" "We both got lucky," Penelope said, exhausted but happy. "The day I fell into that crevasse was the luckiest day of my life." Over the years, their ranch prospered. They added to their herd, built a larger barn, hired hands to help with the work. Penelope's bookkeeping business grew as well, and she became known throughout the territory as someone who could turn around a failing business with smart financial management. They had 3 more children, a daughter named Sarah in 1887, another daughter named Emma in 1889, and finally another son named James in 1892. Her father lived with them for his final years, passing peacefully in his sleep in 1895 at the age of 72. He died knowing his daughter was happy and secure, surrounded by family and love, and that gave Penelope comfort even in her grief. As the years turned into decades, Kieran and Penelope became pillars of their community. They helped other young couples get started, loaning money and giving advice freely. Their children grew strong and capable, taking over more of the ranch work as Kieran's hair turned gray and his joints began to ache on cold mornings. On a warm evening in June of 1913, 30 years to the day after their wedding, Penelope and Kieran sat on the porch of their house, watching the sun set over the valley they had built their life in. Their grandchildren played in the yard, Thomas's 3 boys and Sarah's twin girls, their laughter ringing through the clear air. "You ever think about that storm?" Penelope asked, her hand in Kieran's, their fingers intertwined as they had been for 3 decades. "About how different everything would be if you had not found me." "I think about it all the time," Kieran admitted. "I thank God for that storm, for putting me in the right place at the right time. Finding you was the best thing that ever happened to me." "Not finding me," Penelope corrected gently. "Choosing me. You could have ridden past. You could have decided it was too dangerous to go down into that crevasse. You could have left me at the line shack and never looked back. But you chose to save me, and then you chose to love me, and those choices made all of this possible." Kieran squeezed her hand, his eyes bright with emotion even after all these years. "I would make those same choices again every single day. You are my everything, Penelope Barrett. You always have been. From the moment I saw you at the bottom of that crevasse, hurt and scared but still fighting, I knew then that you were someone special." "We were both special," she said softly. "Special enough to recognize what we had found and brave enough to hold on to it." They sat in comfortable silence as the sun completed its descent, painting the sky in shades of purple and gold. The valley stretched out before them, green and prosperous, dotted with cattle bearing their brand. The house behind them was full of memories and love, every board and nail a testament to what 2 people could build together when they committed to a shared dream. Their oldest grandsons ran up to the porch, breathless and excited. "Grandpa, tell us the story again." "Tell us how you saved Grandma in the snowstorm," Kieran laughed, a sound that still made Penelope's heart skip even after 30 years. "That story again. You have heard it 100 times. But it is the best story," the youngest insisted, "with the crevasse and the rope and everything." "Well, if you insist," Kieran said, settling back in his chair and pulling Penelope closer. It was March of 1883, and the worst snowstorm anyone had seen in years was tearing through these mountains. "I was a young cowboy then, working for Sam Mitchell, and I was trying to reach a line shack before the weather killed me. But as I was riding through the storm, I heard something, a voice calling for help." Penelope listened to him tell the story, embellishing some parts and downplaying his own heroism as he always did, and she marveled at how their life had unfolded from that terrifying day. She thought about the girl she had been, scared and hurt at the bottom of a frozen crevasse, and the woman she had become, strong and confident and surrounded by love. She thought about Kieran, the cowboy who had risked everything to save a stranger, and how that single act of courage had given them both more than they had ever dreamed possible. When the story was finished and the children had run off to play some more, Penelope leaned her head on Kieran's shoulder, feeling the steady rhythm of his breathing, the solid warmth of his presence. This was what happiness looked like, she thought. Not some grand dramatic thing, but this, the quiet evening, the hand in hers, the life they had built together one day at a time. "I love you," she whispered. "I love you too," Kieran replied, kissing the top of her head. "Forever and always." And in that moment, with the last light fading from the sky and their family around them, Penelope knew that falling into that crevasse had not been a disaster at all. It had been the beginning of everything that mattered, the first step on a journey that had led her to exactly where she was meant to be. The years continued to pass gently for Kieran and Penelope Barrett. They watched their children marry and start families of their own, each one settling within a day's ride of the home ranch. Thomas took over the majority of the ranch operations by 1905, proving himself as capable as his father had been. Sarah married a lawyer in Malad City and continued her mother's bookkeeping business, expanding it into a full accounting firm. Emma became a teacher, educating children throughout the region, while James combined his love of ranching with his mother's head for numbers, becoming a livestock buyer known throughout Idaho and Wyoming for his fair dealing. By 1920, Kieran and Penelope had 14 grandchildren and 3 great-grandchildren, and the house they had built was constantly filled with the noise and chaos of family gatherings. Every Sunday, the family gathered for dinner. The table Kieran had built stretched to its maximum length with boards added to accommodate everyone. Penelope still cooked, though her daughters and daughters-in-law tried to make her rest, and Kieran still sat at the head of the table, his hair white now but his eyes still sharp and full of life. They had weathered many storms together over the years, both literal and figurative. They had survived droughts and harsh winters, economic depressions and cattle diseases, the normal trials that came with ranching in the unforgiving mountain country. They had grieved together when they lost friends and neighbors, celebrated together at weddings and births, supported each other through the hard times and savored the good times together. In 1925, on their 42nd wedding anniversary, their children surprised them with a party that brought together everyone whose lives they had touched over the decades. Sam Mitchell, now in his 90s and the closest thing to family Kieran had ever had, gave a speech that had everyone laughing and crying. 42 years ago, a young cowboy who worked for me came riding back from the mountains with a story about saving a woman from a crevasse during a snowstorm, Sam said, his voice wavering but strong. I watched that cowboy transform into a man, and I watched that man build something extraordinary with the woman he saved. This ranch, this family, this community they have created through their hard work and dedication and love, it stands as a testament to what is possible when two people commit to each other and to a shared vision. Kieran, Penelope, you have enriched all of our lives, and we are grateful beyond words. The party lasted well into the night, with music and dancing and storytelling. Penelope danced with Kieran under the stars, moving slowly to a waltz played by their grandson on his fiddle, and she felt the same flutter in her heart she had felt when he first asked to court her all those years ago. "Are you happy?" Kieran asked, his lips close to her ear as they swayed together. "Happier than I ever imagined possible," Penelope replied honestly. "You gave me a life beyond my wildest dreams." "We gave each other that life," Kieran corrected, just as she had done for him years before. "Every good thing we have, we built together." As the 1920s gave way to the 1930s, they began to slow down. Kieran's joints bothered him more, and Penelope's eyesight began to fail, making her beloved bookkeeping difficult. But they still rose early every morning, still sat together on the porch every evening, still held hands like newlyweds. Their love had matured and deepened, becoming something solid and unshakable, a foundation that held firm no matter what storms might rage. In the spring of 1935, as the valley turned green with new growth, and the cattle grazed peacefully in fields they had cultivated together, Kieran fell ill. It started as a simple cold, but quickly developed into pneumonia, the same illness that had brought Penelope riding through that fateful storm 52 years earlier. Dr. Harrison's son, who had taken over his father's practice, came daily to check on him, but they all knew there was little that could be done. Kieran was 82 years old, and his body was simply tired. Penelope never left his side, sitting in a chair next to their bed, holding his hand and talking to him about their life together. She reminded him of that first meeting, of the lined shack and their early struggles, of every triumph and challenge they had faced together. She talked about their children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, about the legacy they were leaving behind. "We had a good run, did we not?" Kieran said one evening, his voice barely a whisper but his eyes still bright when they looked at her. "The best," Penelope agreed, tears streaming down her face. "You gave me everything, Kieran, everything that matters. Promise me something," he said, gripping her hand with what little strength he had left. "Promise me you will not mourn too long. You have so much life left in you, Penelope. Do not spend it grieving for me." "I promise I will live," she said, though her heart was breaking. "But I will grieve because losing you is losing half of myself. You are my heart, Kieran Barrett. You always have been." He smiled at that, a peaceful, contented smile. "And you are mine. Every beat of my heart has been for you since the day I found you in that crevasse. What a gift you have been, Penelope. What an extraordinary gift." He died peacefully that night, with Penelope's hand in his and their children gathered around the bed. His last words were, "I love you," spoken so softly that only Penelope heard them, and she whispered the same words back, holding him until his breathing stopped, and the man who had saved her life and given her everything slipped away. The funeral brought people from throughout Idaho and even neighboring states, all of them wanting to pay their respects to a man who had touched so many lives. They buried him on a hill overlooking the valley with a simple headstone that read, "Kieran Barrett, 1853–1935. Beloved husband, father, grandfather. He lived with courage and loved with his whole heart." Penelope lived for another 8 years, staying active and involved with the ranch and her family. She kept the books for Thomas until her eyesight failed completely, and even then she remained sharp and engaged, offering advice and wisdom to anyone who asked. She never remarried, never even considered it. Kieran had been her one great love, and she was content with the memories they had created together. She passed away quietly in her sleep in May of 1943, at the age of 82, in the bed she had shared with Kieran for 50 years. Her last conscious moments were spent looking at a photograph of the two of them taken on their 50th wedding anniversary, both of them smiling, their hands intertwined, their love evident in every line of their aged faces. They buried her next to Kieran on the hill, and her headstone read, "Penelope Barrett, 1861–1943. Beloved wife, mother, grandmother. She fell and was saved, and in saving her, he saved himself." The ranch stayed in the family for generations, each new caretaker adding their own chapter to the story, while honoring the foundation that Kieran and Penelope had built. The house they constructed still stands, lovingly maintained, and on quiet evenings when the wind blows through the valley, some family members swear they can hear laughter on the porch, the sound of two people who found each other against impossible odds and built a love that transcended time itself. The story of the cowboy who saved the woman from the crevasse became a family legend, told and retold to each new generation, a reminder that sometimes the worst moments of our lives can lead to the best things, that courage and kindness matter. That love, when nurtured and cherished, can create something that lasts far beyond a single lifetime. And somewhere, in whatever comes after this life, Kieran and Penelope Barrett are together still, their hands intertwined, their hearts finally and eternally home,